After hearing that the Marvel's Avengers game, that honestly launched a little bit worse than Anthem, lost Square Enix nearly $50 million, I think anyone with half of a brain knew that there was no way to save it. This game's beta was filled with bugs and glitches, and it was terrible with a capital T. Then with the first patch, they fixed over 1,000 bugs, which definitely isn't something that gives consumers a lot of confidence, when they're about to swipe their credit cards. We saw a poor monetization system be announced in this game, and then the game dropped player numbers really quickly. There just weren't enough people that thought that it was a good enough product for the price. A lot of people purchased it, returned it, and a lot of people just purchased it and gave up on it very, very quickly. If we go to the Steam charts numbers, playing an hour ago, 1,590 players. The 24-hour peak is 2,065 players, and the all-time peak is 28,000. Now, this is just on Steam, so this is only on PC. We're not talking about console numbers here, but, there have been people who have worked on the project that have kind of admitted that the player numbers on console aren't perfect, but as you can see, there was a massive decline in player numbers since the launch of this game. Now, I personally canceled my pre-order of the game leading up to the launch, but now we're here, new DLC characters are out, a new expansion's out, and the game is still a garbage, glitchy grind fest. So I wanted to read this fanbite article that kind of sums up the new DLC and people's thoughts on this new DLC that was supposed to resurrect the game, make people excited about it, get people to swipe their credit cards. This is a fanbite article. 6 months later, Marvel's Avengers still feels lackluster. That's definitely not something you want to hear when you've worked tirelessly on a game, hoping that people would buy it and people would love it. So it says, despite new content and a next-gen upgrade, Avengers still isn't where it needs to be. So in September of last year, Square Enix finally released Marvel's Avengers, their delayed superhero multiplayer live game based on one of the biggest properties in the entire world. It seemed like it should have been a slam dunk considering how popular games like Destiny are and how much money you can make just putting Avengers on everything, from lunchboxes to gaming chairs. Unfortunately for Square Enix, it didn't quite work out that way. It's very true. I thought that this game would have been a success and a slam dunk because it's Marvel's Avengers, because people love Avengers. I do think that the timing of this game was really, really terrible, though. The whole Marvel's Avengers hype had kind of died down. If this game had came out a year and a half ago, maybe it would have gone differently, but a lot of that hype around Marvel's Avengers had kind of, died down a little bit. We now have WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier out, of course, but when this launched 6 months ago, there wasn't a lot of Avengers content coming out. There wasn't a lot of, let's just say, Marvel superhero content coming out. So it says, Avengers was plagued by a glitch-filled, unimpressive launch. The game's first patch boasted 1,000 fixes, which is one of those brags that you probably regret as soon as it leaves your lips. As soon as I heard about this personally, it really turned me off from the game. It had already launched at that point. I canceled my pre-order. I decided I wasn't going to support the game until it was in like a $5 discount bin somewhere. But a lot of people still tried to give this game a chance. They didn't cancel their pre-orders after the awful bug-filled beta, and unfortunately, this is the product that everyone ended up getting. The repetitive multiplayer left a lot of players abandoning the game after the competent and breezy single-player campaign, and the developer Crystal Dynamics ended up delaying the game's entire roadmap for months, with Hawkeye, originally scheduled for early November last year, taking a knee until the next-gen versions arrived, also delayed for several months. This is also another giant problem. When you delay a game's roadmap, I understand as a developer, sometimes it needs to happen. You don't know when you're going to be able to put the content out. You need to work on it more. I completely understand that. But a problem is, as a consumer, I want to know the roadmap for a game. I want to know when the content's coming out, because that gives me a lot of trust in the developers to not only get the product done, but feeling kind of like you're not going to be abandoned. We see with a lot of live service games, they come out, developers completely abandon them, and that's it. The game is what the game is. And unfortunately, it happens too often now. That's why a lot of people don't trust this live service type of game. But continuing on, it says, whether rightly or wrongly, Crystal Dynamics and Square Enix made the call to essentially relaunch the game in March and try to revive its dwindling player base. Like I showed you, I did show you the Steam charts. We don't know the exact console numbers, but hopefully they're a little bit better. I mean, this game definitely isn't perfect, and I definitely do think that the game maybe even deserves this 2,000 player number. But it continues on to say, as of last week, Avengers got a new character, a new campaign titled Future Imperfect, and a next-gen version. So the question now is, does Avengers live up to its potential? The short answer is no. The long answer, no, but with caveats. So in terms of combat, Avengers is the best that it's ever been. I'm really glad to hear this statement. I wasn't someone who wanted this game to release and fail instantly. I wanted this game to come out. I wanted it to be very good. I was hoping that the beta didn't represent the final product, but unfortunately, it did. So it says, with the next-gen patch, the game runs at a high frame rate and makes its extremely chaotic battles a little less chaotic and a lot more fun. This is awesome to hear. The point of playing a video game is for it to be fun and enjoyable, so hearing the word fun about Avengers is something that we haven't actually heard in a while. It says, despite their similarities, both Kate Bishop and Hawkeye are fun to use, and the DualSense support does a good job of adding to the feeling of shooting off numerous arrows and enemies. Good job, Avengers. I'm glad that Avengers is getting a little bit of praise here. This game's definitely been rough, but unfortunately, it says, though, it doesn't fix all of the problems the game had before these updates. So combat is still largely against the same couple of types of robots, all of whom just have way too much health and a predilection for standing off camera and shooting you to death with lasers. I'm someone that can deal with repetitive games and repetitive gameplay. I'm someone who can deal with bugs and, minor glitches and a game not being fully optimized. But the one thing that makes me not want to play a game is when you are fighting the same type of enemy over and over, area by area. There's no difference between the enemies. That is so boring, and that to me is the literal description of a game that is not fun. So the aspect of the game that shines the brightest also still has plenty of repetition problems, which is a bummer because it does feel good to actually fight. At some point, all of the enemies tend to blur together as positional objects of minor description, like a flying thingy that shoots poison or a bipedal robot that has a spear. Moreover, while Hawkeye Clint and Hawkeye Kate are both fun to play, they're both just Hawkeye. Like, they're different, but they're not really that different. They both have the same exact arrow types, which I suppose is fine when they were the first two characters coming out in the first 2 months of the game's roadmap, but it's been 6 months and we literally only have 2 Hawkeyes. This is so boring and so dull. If they at least made the characters slightly different, I'd be okay with it. I'd say there's only so much they can do with arrow type of characters, but when it comes to arrow-based characters in games, I feel like they're never done justice, or if they're done justice, it's done very rarely, and I feel like there could be so much of a difference between these two characters. You could have Kate, who has like poison arrows and like fire arrows, and Hawkeye could have like shock arrows, and just they could both have drastically different arrow types, and that could make a huge difference in gameplay. I just think that that was a very big missed opportunity. I've seen the gameplay for these characters. Looks pretty boring, looks pretty generic, and that's unfortunate. Like this article says, if that was in like the first 2 months of the game releasing, I think that people would accept it a little bit more. I think people would be a bit happier with it, but unfortunately, that's not what they did. That's not the direction that they went in. They just went in the direction that was the most minimal amount of work required to put out these characters. So it says Clint's campaign, Future Imperfect, is fairly interesting, but also fairly short. Just as things get going, you find yourself quickly running out of content, which brings Clint in line with the rest of the cast as an action figure, with no more playsets to do anything cool in. When you're only putting like 2 hours of new content every, let's say, 6 months, because that's how long it's been since the game launched, and this is the first round of DLC, it's not going to be enough for anyone. It's not going to be enough to satisfy people and bring them back to the game, or even give people a reason to buy it in the first place and give it a chance. I see these DLC characters, they look boring. The trailer for them didn't look that bad, but after seeing the gameplay, they're not enough, and this content isn't enough. This content is 2 to 3 hours max if you take it slowly. That is really disappointing. If they had put out a ton of content at once, I think that people would be a lot happier with the state of the game currently. Sure, you can play as Kate Bishop or Clint or one day Black Panther or Spider-Man, and you'll have some fun in the actual act of playing those characters, but nothing changes the fact that combat is bookended by the most boring switch-finding gameplay they can possibly muster, draining you of the power fantasy that is being an action superhero by relegating your activities to something less interesting than rescuing cats from trees. I genuinely think that a lot of people were excited about this game. I definitely think the timing for it was terrible because the Avengers hype had already unfortunately died down. There wasn't really any Marvel content coming out then. Now we have things like WandaVision and Falcon and Winter Soldier, but still, people love these characters like Thor and Captain America, yet when you put out a terrible game, it doesn't matter how much people likes these characters, okay? No one wants to spend $60 on a piece of garbage when there's other really good games out there that you can play instead that are better technically and graphically, and the characters at least don't look like shitty stunt doubles. They were rushing so much to release this game and not delay it again that it was a dead on arrival game, and that's really unfortunate because there were people that worked on this for so long and that were hoping that it would turn out good and people would love it, and unfortunately that wasn't just the case. If they had put in the time into perfecting it, or at least making it, I don't know, playable, it would have done better, guaranteed. But that's all that I really had to discuss in this video. Let everyone know your thoughts in the comments section down below. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to give it a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. And of course, if you didn't, make sure to give it a dislike. I appreciate your support either way, but I will talk to you all again in the next video really soon.